Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to our LanguageCert webinar session today. I think we have people joining us from a number of different countries, so wherever you are in the world, thank you very much for taking some time out of your busy schedules to tune in to this session. In today's session, we're going to be focusing on LanguageCert Academic, which is our English language test that has been designed specifically to evidence English language proficiency for international admissions. Okay. So before we begin, a couple of introductions. So my name is Alison. I'm head of Global Education Partnerships here at LanguageCert, and I look after, alongside my team, our relationships and engagement with universities and colleges throughout the world. And I'm joined by my colleague, Kathy Jones, who works in our test development team and has been working particularly on the development of the LanguageCert Academic test. And between us, we're going to be covering some of the features or areas on the agenda here. So we'll start with a little bit of an overview of LanguageCert and PeopleCert for some of you who are perhaps less familiar with who we are, before going into the development of LanguageCert Academic and taking a look at some of the tasks involved in the test. We'll also talk a little bit about the research around the test, and we'll share with you an example of the test report and how the scores align to the LanguageCert Global Scale. And we'll finish off by covering a few details about the test delivery and some of the security aspects of the test as well. We're going to aim to leave about 10 minutes to answer any questions that you have. So on your screen, you should be able to see a Q&A section there. My colleague Rebecca Ruffner is on hand to monitor the questions as they come in. So please feel free to put your questions into the Q&A throughout the presentation, and we'll try and reach all of those at the end of the session. So we have quite a bit to get through, so we're going to make a start. So first of all, just looking at a little bit about who we are. So LanguageCert is part of the PeopleCert group. So PeopleCert is one of the world's leaders in the certification of people worldwide. So our portfolio of qualifications cover approximately or over 700 qualifications in IT and digital transformation, project management, business, and of course languages. You may recognise a couple of the names there, such as IESOL, which is the qualification for IT service management, and also Prince 2, which is also quite a popular certification for project management. And those are two of our probably most globally recognised certifications. PeopleCert qualifications are very much valued and trusted by some of the world's leading multinationals. And because of the high value of those qualifications and the demand for those within industry, coupled also with some of the challenges that we're experiencing at the moment in terms of graduate employability, we're working increasingly more with institutions who are looking to incorporate our micro-credentials into their degree programs to support employability of students. That is very much a different session, but if you're looking or interested to find out a little bit more about our employability program, then we'd be happy to get in touch with you. Overall, our core mission as an organisation is to develop and deliver accessible, relevant and life-enhancing qualifications. So LanguageCert is a leading provider of English language assessments worldwide, and we provide assessments for individuals who are wanting to evidence their English skills for study, work or migration purposes. We are externally regulated by Ofqual, which is the Office for Qualifications and Examinations Regulation in England. And essentially this ensures that our qualifications and procedures are monitored and of a standard that we claim them to be. Our exams are very much trusted by institutions and government departments in over 90 countries. And as you can see, some examples here of where our exams hold a level of government recognition. In the UK and Ireland, for example, our exams, some of you will know, We're an approved provider for tests of English for visa purposes. So in the UK and Ireland, for example, for study visas. We have a dedicated in-house test development and research team who collectively bring a wealth of experience from across the assessment sector and been working in the sector for many years, some of us. We work with partners, language schools, education advisors throughout the world, and we also have offices based locally to support stakeholders in various countries around the world. We have a real commitment to test accessibility, making our tests as accessible as possible, and that's through our extensive network of test centres, but also through our online delivery solution, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that a bit later on. So if we just take a quick look at the LanguageCert portfolio, so the exams that we cover, our range of exams are designed to cater for all needs and purposes, and that starts at the very beginning. So at the very beginning of the language learning journey, we have our young learners exams for children aged 7 and upwards. We also have the LanguageCert Test of English exam, that's a multi-level exam designed mainly with English for the workplace in mind, and that's mainly due to the flexibility of being able to have skills assessment separately. So if you wanted to do just reading and listening on its own, or writing on its own, or speaking, you can do that. So really a test that's designed where not all 4 skills are required. LanguageCert IESOL is probably our best known and most widely used set of exams. So the IESOL is a set of CEFR level-based exams ranging from A1 through to C2, so a test for each of the levels. And these qualifications are widely used to evidence proficiency for education, employment, and migration purposes. And because of that, so IESOL is also recognised in the UK by UK Visas and Immigration as a secure English language test, so SALT. So until recently, the LanguageCert portfolio has mainly covered tests that are very much CFR level based. But following feedback from extensive use of our tests worldwide, the LanguageCert portfolio now also includes 2 multi-level test variants. So one of those is LanguageCert General, aimed at workers and migrants, and then LanguageCert Academic. So these additional tests still span the CFR and measure against the CFR, but they are each one test with scores reported on the new LanguageCert Global Scale, and that's something we'll be covering a bit later on. So LanguageCert Academic and LanguageCert General went through Ofqual regulation last year, and also went through a limited release last year. And this has allowed us to, since then, to complete an extensive period of pre-testing and trialing, and also to carry out external validation reviews. And again, Kathy will be talking a bit about that in a moment. So when we focus on LanguageCert Academic and cover some of the, I suppose, key features. So our IESOL test, as mentioned, is recognised by almost 2,000 institutions and organisations around the world. And whilst that test is still continues to be valid and reliable test of English of the 4 skills, we've also consulted and received feedback from institutions who are looking for a test that is more focused on the needs of the higher education sector. So hence the development of LanguageCert Academic. So in the development of the test, what we've done is taken IESOL C1 as a starting point, and then developed this into one multi-level test spanning B1 through to C2. So students will enter for the one test rather than enter for a specific test level. We've also added more academic content and focus for all of the tasks, and Kathy will be covering that in a moment. So what makes LanguageCert Academic academic? There's a new LanguageCert Global Scale, which reports an overall score and also a skill score based on a 0 to 100 scale, allowing flexibility to set minimum score requirements across different CFR attainment levels. And when we take a look at the test report a bit later on, you'll also see that we're providing some additional feedback on the performance of speaking and writing in particular. So we'll take a look at that in a bit later on. All of what we do and are continuing to do is underpinned by research and validation. And this includes one of the largest concordance projects of its kind that's ever been conducted. So we can provide robust and externally validated score equivalences with other tests. As mentioned before, one of our missions is to make our tests as accessible as possible without compromising on test security. So as we know, English testing for admissions is quite high stakes in nature. So we continue to invest in our security measures, and we'll talk a little bit about that towards the end. So now I'm going to hand over to Kathy, who's going to talk a little bit about the actual development of the test, of the structure, and look at some of the tasks involved.
Thank you, Alison. So I'm going to build a little bit on what Alison said in her overview of the test, and outline how the test has come about and describe some of its key features and benefits. I've been to quite a few sort of conferences and things over my career in assessment, and I always feel that assessment gets a bit of a bad press. It's kind of the dry end of the deal. Earlier on in my career, I was managing a Chinese qualification for use in the UK for young children. And I remember being at an event where teachers were able to stand up and describe the exchange program with the Chinese youngsters, and they had these photos of Chinese dragons. And I had to then stand up after this lovely, colourful display and go, right, now this is how we assess it. And I just sort of felt the room go cold. But what I want to be able to do in this webinar, in describing how we've approached this development, is perhaps to kind of convey some of the sort of passion personally I have for assessment, so you understand exactly how much has gone into refocusing this test for an academic purpose. And I think the best way to kind of contextualize that is to convey, on a day I feel it more than ever, as a mother of a 16-year-old son taking his first GCSE today, that testing matters. At its most fundamental level, testing really matters. The outcomes affect people's life chances. We often say that qualifications open doors, in the sense that candidates who take high stakes exams, as Alison's just been describing, it gets them access to some life-changing opportunities such as university admission or migration for work. So in the same way as a door can provide access to a new room or a space, qualifications can provide access to higher education, career opportunities, experiences, communities, progression, and you know, they have the capacity to affect transformative change. And because of this, we have an ethical and moral responsibility to ensure that these gateways that we're creating to these new experiences are reliable, secure, and fit for purpose, our sort of trio, our mantra. So to sort of build on that analogy a little bit with the door, if you imagine the qualification as a door, as a threshold, we need to kind of check the functioning of this door relatively frequently to make sure it's not squeaky or jammed, it stays a good fit, minimal shrinkage or expansion over time, that it looks nice, that it's well kept, not scruffy, it's in keeping with its surroundings. And in keeping this metaphorical door fit for purpose, as we've been doing, redesigning this test for a high stakes context such as university admission, we have a whole range of different considerations to take into account. There is a host of checks and balances that need to be struck, encompassing all sorts of things that I don't have time to go into in entirety right now, but if you can imagine, they, you know, encompassing test validity, reliability, practicality, ethics, commercial interests, pedagogical value, and really wanting to make a positive impact. Those of you in the UK will be familiar with the news today about the recent SATs exams that students have taken. You know, these 11-year-olds taking these stats for school reporting purposes in floods of tears because the level is completely wrong for what they've been doing. We need to make sure that we're not causing this kind of experience and this kind of disruption, because it can have a life-changing impact. So in addition to being reliable, secure and fit for purpose, we also need to make sure that we stand alongside all the new entrants in the field, existing providers, and we want our tests to be innovative, user-friendly and fast. So the way we've done this, and what I want to try and convey to you today, is that I'll talk about the research in a minute, but we've taken a really evidence-informed approach to redeveloping, refocusing IESOL C1 as a starting point and repurposing it for an academic context. So how have we done this? What makes academic academic? We've added more explicitly academic content. That's a statement made at a very high level. Sounds easier than it actually is, and I'll explain why. We've developed a multi-level test rather than a single level test, which scores across the relevant levels, reported on a user-friendly, understandable 0 to 100 global scale for each of the 4 skills, as well as providing an overall CFR level. We've said it's for those wanting to study in higher education in an English-speaking environment. We've got a global candidature. And the qualification is primarily going to be used for entrance purposes to universities running English medium courses. Test takers will need general academic language proficiency, so not subject-specific discipline. And to do this, we've developed a test that's going to focus on the English language encountered and produced in an academic domain. And I'll talk a little bit about how we've done that. And by general academic English, as I've said, I don't mean domain-specific English. And I also mean, because this is going to be used as a test for university entrance, it needs to have an element of predictive validity, high predictive validity. But what we can't do is we can't test how well these test takers understand what happens in a seminar. That wouldn't be fair. They're not at that point yet. What we're looking for is aptitude for those cognitive processes that will enable them to flourish once they get into the academic context. So the test needs high levels of predictive validity to show how well we think that the test taker is going to perform in an academic setting. And covering those levels that are most relevant to recognising institutions. So in order to do this, I've sort of separated it into 3 key areas that we've kind of addressed to work out what makes academic academic. And this is, years of work to identify what we want to do here, of evidence-informed work. This is using LanguageCert research as well as wider assessment research that's out there. So our contexts are academic. So scenarios like discussions with tutors, fellow students, university staff, and using authentic source materials wherever possible, crafted to a degree to ensure that we can test the full range of things we want to test, but articles, journals, reports. We want to make sure that the task types sample the features of language and skills from the target language domain. So what are those cognitive processes that students are going to need to develop to succeed? Okay, so things like critical thinking, evaluation, being able to construct meaning, giving a presentation. And I've already said the levels of this test covering B1 to C2. Spanning the CEFR range that will help recognising institutions decide how well a student's going to be able to cope with the academic language demands at university. And in order to do this, much hinges on this definition of the target language domain, what the academic context, what the users actually need to be able to do, their skills, knowledge and competencies. And this is where we've drawn on this cradle of underpinning research. And our foundational definition that we're using is going to be kept under review. We'll be evaluating this as part of the research that I shall tell you about now and ongoing. So it's rooted in a core of research, and it's going to be contributing to that core of research. And it's founded in real world communicative competence. Okay, this wraps around everything that we're going to do. The test is going to be accompanied by a suite of self-access learning and preparation materials derived from the same definition. We have an ongoing research and validation program, both internal and external, again, coming back to that same definition to make sure that what we are testing and what we are promoting in a way through the test, encouraging students to go away and practice in order to get the level they want, to make sure that those are the right things. I have a slightly questionable example that I gave last time, and it concerned my father, but when he was, I was giving this example about learning to drive, and as part of my UK driving test, I had to learn to reverse around a corner. I could not do it. It was completely beyond me. I mean, I am a pretty hopeless driver anyway, but ever since I finally passed my test, I have never needed to reverse around a corner. And I was trying to, explain to my dad, that's an example of a skill maybe that was really quite hammered home during the test, but have I needed it in real life? But he said, I really think you ought to be able to reverse around a corner. So perhaps the jury's out on that one. But making sure that everything that we're doing is linked to this definition of real world target language domain, then gives us a really good opportunity to work on washback by design. And this is something that's embedded in all our development and test review processes. And what I mean by this washback by design is making sure that if our foundational definition of what we think the learners can do is relevant and accurate, learners are going to be preparing the skills which will support their development and enable them to succeed. It's a complex, it's a challenging area. There's lots of really good research ongoing and already out there about washback by design. And we're lucky to have two people who are, significant voices in the field working on one of our research panels. But complex and challenging as it might be, embedding this notion of positive impact and washback by design, I think is emphatically non-negotiable, because to deliver an assessment without attempting to understand or measure the intended or unintended consequences of the test and its impact on the lives and the life chances of the people who are taking that exam would be morally and ethically questionable. So we're fortunate to be working with some people who really are experts in that field, and I hope over time that we're going to be able to really add something to this area of research. So my next slide, and I'm not going to talk for that long about each slide, sorry. My next slide, that's the previous one. Is about our research, and it's just a kind of visual representation of how I see the interconnectedness of our approach to research. So at the bottom you have this cradle of the wider underpinning assessment research, and this is really what the refocusing in response to stakeholder feedback of IESOL CELT C1 is all about. Okay. LanguageCert itself has an established research and validation team, and they have been working hard on research into all LanguageCert qualifications. And then as part of this development, we've got qualification-specific academic research going on in relation to LanguageCert Academic. And I've just highlighted there some of the projects that are going on. So we have test calibration and internal validation work undertaken by our internal team. This major concordance study that Alison mentioned that is looking at performance in LanguageCert Academic compared with the IELTS exam, IELTS Academic, and that's being undertaken with Crella, based at the University of Bedfordshire. We are working with UK ECTIS on CEFR, external CEFR benchmarking analysis of the qualification. So we know the claims that we make about the results of our multi-level test are robust, and that we can say this is externally verified. And also looking at mapping to other internationally recognised frameworks like the Canadian benchmark, the CLB. So there's lots of stuff going on, and I think you're going to have access to these slides afterwards, and there's a little link there to a research newsletter that comes out from the assessment division, which highlights what we're doing, what we're finding out, points to some relevant papers. So it may be worth, if you haven't already, signing up to receive that. I think it's a quarterly publication, but that link's there if you're interested. And all this I think is indicative of our approach to research at LanguageCert, where test development shouldn't really be kind of secret. It's important for us to be as transparent and as open as possible about the test development processes, what we're finding, and how frequently this is being checked. Because I think that's the only way really to give confidence to all our stakeholders in the caliber of the tests and the research that we're undertaking. So the research that we're doing is going to be publicly available, and you know that's super important. We have the concordancing study going on at the moment with Crella. We have a preliminary report that is so far looking really good, showing some really strong correlation between the tests. But by the end of this concordance study, we think it's going to, we hope to have involved more than 1,000. I think it's up to 1,200 candidates taking both LanguageCert Academic and the IELTS Academic. So I'll just go on now to talk a little bit about the structure of the test. So I've already said it's a 4-skill test, and I don't have time to show you an example of every single task type which is in the test, but I wanted to just be able to give you a flavour of this idea, how we have gone about refocusing the IESOL CELT C1 written for, created for a more general purpose, to make this work for an academic context. And the key thing to remember is this is so much more than just making the test, like taking an existing item, for example, here 2 friends going to an art gallery, and just making it into you here 2 students visiting an art gallery. That's only going to give you an academic related context. And depending on what's in the nature of the conversation, you could have a task there that for a general purpose that's about what the entry cost to the gallery is, or the location of the cafe, or what they might buy in the shop. In order to repurpose material, we've had to take a really deep dive into our construct and really understanding the cognitive processes that we want to tap into. So the only way that we could repurpose would be to make sure that there is an element of that, take that art gallery example, where the pair of students are interacting about the quality, about what the nature of the exhibition is. So it's not as simple as just reusing stuff. A test of general English is never going to be right for a test of academic English. So if we just, I've taken an example for one task for each skill. So we can just look at those. So if we just look at the example for academic reading, in this task, candidates, test takers, they read an extended text and it's got some sentences missing. They read the sentences and they have to decide which sentence fits in where. There are 2 additional distractor sentences that they don't need to use. So the real world skill that we want to tap here is fluent and active reading of academic texts. To be able to do this, you need to understand text cohesion, how texts are constructed, how they're built, where the meaning is. The benefit of preparing to be able to undertake a task like this is improving your understanding of how academic texts are structured, what the conventions are, which in turn informs your ability to write good academic texts. It enables, it encourages, it promotes learners taking a strategic approach to their reading. They're able to see how texts can be broken down into logical chunks separated with discourse markers, and to develop some of those sort of almost metacognitive skills around reading. So greater confidence, greater resilience to be able to tackle a range of academic reading and writing tasks by having developed these tools in your academic toolkit that you can apply, set you in really good stead for the academic world, without requiring you to already be in it, if that makes sense. So the next task that I was going to show you is a speaking one. This is a task where candidates have short time to look at a source, a stimulus, a visual stimulus, and prepare and deliver a short presentation to talk to this stimulus. And so the kind of real world skill we're tapping here is being able to, I could probably do with doing this one, presenting clearly and concisely on an academic theme in tutorials, seminars or academic exams, responding to questions. So it's not just a presentation, there's then that degree of interaction with the examiner. And the benefit will be improved ability to articulate a more formal response in an academic style to a stimulus, and an improved ability to present, understand and answer questions in real time. The next task is a listening one. And in this one, I've got a short audio embedded that I think Alison's going to be able to play.
Conversation 1.
I found a great reading list for our ancient history course.
Where? I looked on the university website and couldn't find one.
It's not in a very obvious place. I'll send you the link.
Okay, so candidates hear a short conversation and the task is to complete the dialogue they've heard by choosing the most appropriate option from the given 3. And this means that being able to do this for the candidate is understanding and recognizing speaker relationships, the context in different scenarios. So conversing with lecturers, fellow students or university staff, requires knowing what would be an appropriate language register to use to make that response. And the benefit of preparing for this kind of task is an increased sort of more successful, smooth conversation. It will facilitate better joint understanding, that understanding of appropriacy of register, and just be able to get things done more effectively. So the final example is a writing example, fairly tried and tested formula where candidates write a discursive piece on an academic subject. They write about 250 words. And this is the real world skills and processes here are comparing, contrasting, describing, analysing, giving pros and cons, constructing meaning, presenting and justifying an argument. There's an awful lot that can be done with this task. And the benefit of preparing it is that they will be well placed to produce an extended piece of writing in which they need to argue or develop a position coherently. So in that whistle-stop tour of what I've done, I hope that I've been able to kind of give a flavour of what we're trying to achieve with this qualification. So if you prepare for this kind of test, really endeavouring to ensure from a research-informed point of view and ongoing that you are you're preparing the right skills, you're honing the right cognitive processes such as analysis, evaluation, critical thinking, all those good things that you need for academic success. It's definitely not a test of understanding, you know, what happens at university or how you participate in a seminar, but a test of aptitude and promoting development of the right skills and communicative language competence that you need to flourish in an academic context, and in that way promoting positive washback by design.
Thank you, Kathy. Thanks for that really comprehensive overview. And we're now going to move on to taking a look at, once the students have taken the test, having a look at the test report form that students will receive, but also that you as score users or institutions as score users will receive through our results verification systems. So first of all 4 skills are reported on the one test form. That might seem quite obvious, but those of you who've been using our IESOL, I think we've been speaking on a separate test form. So you'll be glad to hear that all 4 are now presented on the one test report. The first couple of sections include information about the candidate, some obvious ones there, including, and they have a candidate number, the type of ID that they presented at the test, ID number, also things like, for example, the mode of delivery, so whether it was taken at a test centre or via online as well. And we also include a photo of the candidate's test day photo, so that will appear on the score report as well. And then we go on to the scores. So students will receive, as we say, it's got quite an easy to manage global score scale from 0 to 100, and students will receive a score on for each of the skills, listening, speaking, reading and writing, and also an overall score, and they will be based on that scale. And we're also providing a CEFR overall level attained. We're providing some additional information. So, for example, we're providing the performance descriptors on a second page, so that, I mean, some of you will be very familiar with the performance descriptors. These are based on the Common European Framework. Others less so. So if you're, working in an admissions officer's office, some people might be less familiar as to, well, what does that score mean against, for example, the CEF benchmarking system, and also for students as well to really understand what their scores mean in terms of their ability. So we're providing that guidance there. And as you can see, we're also providing additional feedback for the performance on writing and speaking. So this feedback will be descriptive rather than numerical, and this is really additional information really to support students perhaps looking at areas for further improvement or development, students who are perhaps going into pre-sessional courses. That might help just to inform some areas for further development, but we certainly wouldn't advise using that additional feedback as a basis of making any sort of decisions. So that's the test report, and again, along with lots of information that we shared with you today, that's something that we can provide in a follow-up, so you can have a copy of that. What we need to look at now is the scores, and how often we get questions around, right, well, how do your scores relate to other tests? So on this table, you can see, going from left to right, we have the LanguageCert Global Scale, and then how the 0 to a 100 scale maps to the Common European Framework. We then show LanguageCert Academic scores on that scale, and then how those scores relate to IELTS. So, for example, if you have an IELTS requirement of 6, then this relates to a LanguageCert Academic score of 65. Or if you are asking for a 6.5, then that will relate to a LanguageCert score of 70. And you can use this equivalencies, obviously, to set requirements also at the skill level. As mentioned, so this will also be sent to you, so you don't need to sort of digest this now, so we will happily send this across. And as mentioned earlier, we're near, as Kathy was talking about, we're near completion of, as she mentioned, one of the largest concordance studies taken with IELTS. And these equivalencies here are based on findings of an already large data set, and we're not expecting these equivalencies to change. The data, as Kathy mentioned, has also been externally reviewed by Krella, and hopefully we'll be looking at including other tests in terms of our equivalences and our concordance study in the very, very near future. A little bit about the delivery, test delivery. We are, the LanguageCert Academic will be going live, fully available from next month. And students can book for the test via our website. The test will be available to take at one of our secure test centres, and these is our centre network that we use to deliver our UKVI CELT exams. And these centres are based in over 115 countries around the world. The test will be available also online with our live remote proctoring. And the date for this is still to be determined, but it will be sometime towards the end of the year. So it will be available both in the test centres and also online as well. The written and the spoken exams, so the written component covering obviously listening and reading, can be taken on the same day. But either way, both components must be taken within 14 days of each other. And then results will be issued within 5 working days. And as soon as the results are made available to the student then can go into our platform and select which institution or institutions they want to send their scores to. And there's no limit to the number of institutions and no cost to the student for that as well in terms of score sending. Okay, so test security. Wanted to cover a little bit about this if we're not doing too badly for time. But to be honest, this does warrant its own dedicated session. And so we're planning a separate webinar on test security very soon. So, but on this slide are just some of the features relating to test security, but it doesn't necessarily cover everything that's involved. Taking a quick look at the test centres, these are centres that very much have to adhere to strict protocols, a set of security protocols and criteria. The centres that we use have dedicated staff and authorised staff that are trained and go through also regular audits. Staff conducts a full ID check and capture information such as a digital signature and also a photo, which is the same photo that appears in the test report. All belongings are stored in lockers, and also staff also carry out additional screening just to make sure that there are no other hidden devices. As you'd expect, only test material is available on the computer, and we use Exam Shield. So Exam Shield is our own browser and blacklisted application blocking software to deliver the test, and that's for both at the test centre and also for online. And this essentially inactivates any sort of keyboard functionality as well as blocking browser use, and blocks the ability to copy paste, for example, print screen, or any other functionalities that might aid some candidates in harvesting test material. So for online, this is actually something we've been doing at PeopleCert for a good number of years, and perhaps longer than most. So we first started delivering tests online with PeopleCert qualifications back in 2014, and with LanguageCert exams since 2019. So different providers will manage security with regards to online in different ways. And at PeopleCert, we combine very much the use of live proctoring throughout the entire session, also with the use and support in the latest of technology. So our proctors are employed directly by PeopleCert. We're not reliant on any third-party service providers, and we have complete control over the whole process. The proctor to candidate ratio is approximately, it's 1.5, so 1.4 on a quiet season, up to 1.6, so it's quite small ratio, we would say, and certainly compared to sometimes even in a large test centre setting. Our proctors conduct a full ID check, verifying that the candidate that the ID that the candidate registered with is presented during the onboarding. And we are shortly implementing what we call KYC technology, which stands for Know Your Customer, to support proctors during the onboarding process. So this software essentially compares the candidate ID that's presented during the onboarding process. But it does a number of things. So the first thing it does is check that document against a document template database per country, just to make sure that that document, the ID that's presented, complies with the ID specifications for that particular country. What it also does is check the candidate's facial characteristics against the photo in the ID presented. And there is also a background check carried out in our LanguageCert database to make sure that the candidate has not appeared under a different name and different ID for a previous test. And that's also the same with regards to capturing an audio and checking that against any previous speaking tests that they've taken with us. So the implementation of KYC really will go sort of even further in helping to combat issues or challenges that all test providers are faced in terms of impersonation and the use of fake IDs, for example. The other things that happen with online security is a 360-degree room scan before the test session starts, just to make sure that there's nobody else in the room, there's no inappropriate material around, and we'll also be shortly introducing a second camera into that process to support sort of checks of any potential hidden, black spots. So for example, making sure that we also have an image of the candidate's computer as well. And our proctors are also supported by AI alerts throughout the session. So they'll be monitoring the students, the candidates, but the AI will also pick up if there's additional sort of voices in the room, obviously if there's an additional person in the room, if the candidate is starting to act a bit strangely, like looking away from the computer screen a bit too many times. So that would be flagged to the proctor, and then the proctor can deal with that or manage that accordingly. That's just gives a bit of a flavour in terms of test security, but there are a whole range of additional enhancements that we've already made and we're continuing to make with regards to online in particular. It's a process that never stops in terms of that investment. So it's something that providers like ourselves need to continually keep on top of. Okay, so I think last slide. I couldn't really finish the presentation without giving a bit of a plug for recognition. So, I mean, ultimately, we are seeking support from institutions and across the sector to accept LanguageCert Academic, and hoping that, especially those already accepting our tests, this is a test that you'll be able to include as part of your list of acceptable tests over the summer, for example. We've covered most of these points here on the slide, so I won't run through each of these individually, but I hope what Kathy and I have shown you today ticks most or includes most of the things that you're looking for when it comes to evidencing English language proficiency for international student applications. But of course, we'd be more than happy to arrange separate sessions, separate presentations to your staff, or run through any element of this in more detail. If you want to reach out to us, then we're more than happy to do that. The last thing I really just want to highlight is that, yes, of course, we're a dedicated developer and deliverer of English language tests, but we also have another range of benefits that are aimed at supporting admissions and recruitment strategies from, for example, programs to support employability, as I mentioned at the very beginning, through to some of the scholarship programs that we've recently launched, and help also with diversification in terms of reaching other student populations through our network that we have, not just for LanguageCert, but PeopleCert as well. So again, please do get in touch if you'd like to find out a little bit more about sort of the additional things that we're doing